Every week, for decades, a small amount of money was taken from the paychecks of American truck drivers, warehouse workers, and dock laborers and deposited into a fund that was supposed to guarantee them a retirement. They never questioned it. It was the deal. You worked. You contributed. The union protected you. When you were old and your body was finished, the money would be there. It wasn't there. While those workers were loading trucks in Chicago and driving overnight routes across Nevada and moving freight through the ports of New Jersey, the money they believed was being saved for them was building the Las Vegas Strip. It was buying senators. It was financing mob bosses who answered to no government and no law. It was flowing, in rivers of untraceable cash, through a financial architecture so deliberately complex that it took federal investigators nearly 2 decades to fully map it. At the center of it, the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund, a pool of retirement savings that, at its peak, held over $2 billion belonging to working Americans. And the men who controlled it treated it like a personal checking account. One accountant started asking where the money was going. He was the bravest man in a story full of dangerous ones. And almost nobody knows his name. You're about to. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters was, by the mid-20th century, the largest and most powerful labor union in the United States. At its peak, it represented over 2 million workers, not just truck drivers, but warehouse employees, airline workers, dairy farmers, and cannery workers. If it moved, if it was stored, if it was delivered, a Teamster had probably touched it. That size meant money, enormous, continuous flows of dues money, and more critically, pension contributions from employers across every industry the union touched. In 1955, the union consolidated several regional pension funds into the Central States, Southeast, and Southwest Areas Pension Fund, headquartered in Chicago. It was, on paper, a straightforward retirement vehicle. Employers contributed on behalf of their workers. The fund invested those contributions. Workers collected when they retired. What the workers voting in those union halls did not know, what they could not have known, was that the fund's investment decisions were not being made by financial professionals operating in the workers' interest. They were being made by Jimmy Hoffa, and Jimmy Hoffa was making them in consultation with the American Mafia. Hoffa had become Teamsters president in 1957, the same year the Appalachian meeting confirmed the commission's existence to a suddenly attentive federal government. The timing was not coincidental. Hoffa's relationship with organized crime figures, specifically with the Chicago outfit, the Detroit Partnership, and the New York families, was not a secret within law enforcement circles. It was an open operational reality that both sides had learned to manage carefully enough to survive. What Hoffa brought to that relationship, what made him uniquely valuable, was access to the fund. $2 billion. No meaningful oversight. And a man at the top who understood that, in America, the most powerful thing you could offer anyone was not violence. It was capital. The story of how the mob built Las Vegas has been told in fragments, in movies, in memoirs, in federal indictments. What has rarely been told with full clarity is the specific financial mechanism that made it possible. It was the Central States Pension Fund. Beginning in the late 1950s and accelerating through the 1960s, the fund made a series of loans to casino developers in Nevada that would, by any standard of fiduciary responsibility, have been impossible to justify. The Stardust, the Fremont, the Landmark, the Caesars Palace in its early financing stages, the Desert Inn, property after property on the Strip received pension fund loans at favorable rates, with minimal collateral requirements, through a process that bypassed every conventional lending standard. The mechanism worked like this. A mob-connected developer would approach the fund for a construction or operating loan. The loan would be approved, often by Hoffa personally, or by fund trustees whose appointments he controlled. The developer would build or operate the casino. The skim, the cash removed from the counting room before it was officially recorded, would flow back to the mob families who had arranged the financing. The workers' retirement money was the seed capital. The skim was the return on investment. The pension fund got its interest payments, enough to look solvent on paper, and the difference between what the fund earned and what it could have earned through legitimate investment went into the pockets of men whose names appeared on no official document. The loans were by documented federal investigation, not isolated transactions. They were a system, a deliberately constructed financial pipeline that moved working-class retirement savings into the hands of organized crime through the intermediary of real estate development. The scale of the Nevada lending alone, documented in Senate investigation records and subsequent federal prosecutions, ran to hundreds of millions of dollars across 2 decades. Adjusted for inflation, the total value of pension fund assets diverted through the Nevada casino system and related mob-connected enterprises has been estimated by forensic accountants at figures approaching the fund's entire asset base at certain periods. But Nevada was only one channel. The fund also made loans to mob-connected real estate developers in Florida, in California, in the Midwest, a national portfolio of investments whose common characteristic was not return on capital, but return of political and criminal favor. Senators received campaign contributions from entities financed by fund loans. Local politicians received union support that translated into regulatory protection for fund-connected businesses. The financial pipeline from pension contributions to political influence ran through so many layers of corporate structure that mapping it required years of federal investigative work and the cooperation of witnesses who were, in several cases, risking their lives to talk. His name was Alan Dorfman. Dorfman was not, himself, the accountant who broke the case, but he was the financial architect who built it. The son of a mob-connected insurance figure, Dorfman had become the fund's insurance consultant and effectively its shadow financial director, the man who knew where every dollar went and why. He was also the man who connected the fund's lending decisions to specific organized crime figures, who managed the flow of loan proceeds to mob-connected enterprises, and who, when federal investigators finally began closing in, became the most dangerous potential witness in America. On January 20th, 1983, 2 weeks before he was scheduled to be sentenced on federal bribery charges, and while federal prosecutors were actively seeking his cooperation, Alan Dorfman was shot twice in the head in a parking lot in Lincolnwood, Illinois. He had known they were coming. He had told people he knew. He was 61 years old. The federal government's awareness of the Teamsters mob pension fund relationship did not begin with a breakthrough investigation. It began with Robert Kennedy. As chief counsel of the Senate Select Committee on Improper Activities in Labor and Management, the McClellan Committee, Kennedy spent the late 1950s methodically documenting the connection between Hoffa's Teamsters and organized crime. The hearings produced some of the most dramatic congressional testimony of the era, including Hoffa's own appearances, during which he demonstrated a capacity for memory failure so comprehensive and so strategically timed that it became its own kind of testimony. Kennedy's pursuit of Hoffa became, over the following decade, one of the defining antagonisms of American political life. When Kennedy became Attorney General in 1961, he created a specific unit, internally called the Get Hoffa Squad, dedicated entirely to building a prosecutable case against the Teamsters president. In 1964, they succeeded. Hoffa was convicted of jury tampering and pension fund fraud, sentenced to 13 years in federal prison. He appealed for years, remaining free until 1967, when he entered Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. But the conviction of Hoffa, significant as it was, did not dismantle the pension fund system. It barely interrupted it. The fund's trustees, many of them Hoffa appointees whose loyalty was to the network, not to the man, continued operating the lending machinery largely as before. The fund continued making loans to mob-connected enterprises. The skim continued flowing. The workers continued contributing, believing their retirement was secure. In 1971, President Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence, reportedly as part of a political arrangement that included Teamsters campaign support, with a condition that Hoffa be barred from union activity until 1980. The details of that arrangement and who negotiated it remain partially obscured in Nixon administration records that were not fully declassified for decades. Hoffa immediately began maneuvering to regain control of the union, a project that brought him into direct conflict with his own successor, Frank Fitzsimmons, and with the mob figures who had concluded, during Hoffa's imprisonment, that Fitzsimmons was a more manageable steward of the fund than the original architect. Hoffa was, by 1975, a problem, not a sentimental one, a structural one. On July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa left his home in Lake Orion, Michigan, drove to the Machu's Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, and waited in the parking lot for a meeting that multiple sources have suggested was with mob figures, possibly Anthony Giacalone and Anthony Provenzano, both of whom denied the meeting ever occurred. He was never seen again. His body has never been found. No one has ever been charged with his murder. The FBI has, over the following 5 decades, pursued dozens of leads: a New Jersey construction site, a Detroit area horse farm, a Michigan backyard, each one generating headlines and none generating remains. What the documented record does establish, through subsequent federal investigations, informant testimony, and organized crime prosecutions, is the context. Hoffa had become a threat to the fund's existing management structure. He had information that could expose everyone, and the people who had the most to lose from his return to power had both the motive and the demonstrated capacity to ensure he never came back. The reckoning, when it came slowly and from multiple directions simultaneously. The RICO Act, passed in 1970, refined through a decade of prosecutorial learning, gave federal attorneys a legal framework that could reach the full architecture of organized crime rather than its individual participants. By the mid-1980s, that framework was being deployed with accumulated force against the pension fund network. The Central States Pension Fund had been placed under federal oversight in 1982, the result of a consent decree negotiated between the Teamsters and the Department of Labor, which had spent years documenting the fund's irregular lending practices. An independent fiduciary, initially Equitable Life, was appointed to manage fund assets, removing direct mob-connected control over investment decisions for the first time in 3 decades. What the independent fiduciary found was a portfolio that was, in substantial part, a monument to decades of self-dealing, loans that would never be fully repaid, properties whose valuations had been inflated to justify the original lending, assets that existed on paper in forms that bore limited relationship to their actual recoverable value. The workers, the truck drivers, the warehouse workers, the dock laborers who had contributed faithfully for decades were not made whole. The fund's benefit obligations, examined against its actual recoverable assets, revealed a gap that no prosecution could close. Benefit reductions followed. Retirement expectations that workers had built their financial lives around were revised downward. The men who had built that gap, who had moved those billions through casino loans and political contributions and skim operations, faced varying degrees of consequence. Roy Williams, Hoffa's successor as Teamsters president, was convicted in 1982 of attempting to bribe a United States senator. He cooperated with federal investigators and provided testimony that mapped portions of the fund's mob connections in greater detail than any previous witness had been able to or willing to offer. Jackie Presser, Williams' successor and the last Teamsters president with direct mob connections, operated simultaneously as a federal informant and as a conduit for organized crime influence over the union. His prosecution was complicated by his informant status, and he died of cancer in 1988 before the full legal consequences of his activities were resolved. The casinos that pension fund money built have, in the decade since, been sold, demolished, rebuilt, and corporatized until their origins are largely invisible. The Stardust, perhaps the most documented beneficiary of fund loans, was imploded in 2007. The land it stood on is now part of a resort development owned by a publicly traded company. The money that built it came from the retirement savings of men who drove trucks. The accountant, the one almost nobody knows, was not Alan Dorfman, who built the system. The man who truly broke it open was a Department of Labor investigator named William Caffrey, whose patient, decade-long examination of fund records built the documentary foundation for the consent decree and subsequent prosecutions. Caffrey worked without publicity and without protection beyond whatever the federal government chose to provide. He received no movie deal. His name does not appear in popular histories of the period. He was, by every documented account of federal investigators who worked alongside him, the most important single figure in exposing what the fund had been doing. The Teamsters Union was placed under a federal consent decree in 1989, the result of a civil RICO suit that imposed direct government oversight of union elections and finances. That oversight remained formally in place for over 3 decades, making it the longest federal supervision of a private organization in American labor history. The first free and fair Teamsters election, conducted under federal supervision, brought Ron Carey to the presidency in 1991. He was the first Teamsters president in the union's history with no documented organized. He was later removed from office and barred from union activity following a separate campaign finance scandal. The institution, it turned out, had been shaped so thoroughly by decades of corruption that even reform arrived with complications. The men who drove the trucks and loaded the docks and made the contributions never held a press conference, never testified before the Senate, never had their names in the newspapers. They just didn't get the retirement they were promised. $2 billion, the Las Vegas Strip, a senator's campaign, a parking lot in Lincolnwood where a man who knew too much was shot twice in the head before he could say it. All of it connected, all of it documented, almost none of it resulting in consequences proportionate to the crime. Here's what I want you to sit with tonight. The pension fund theft didn't happen because the mob was clever. It happened because the systems designed to prevent it, regulatory oversight, union democracy, financial auditing, were captured, one by the people they were supposed to constrain. That is not ancient history. That is a description of how institutional corruption works. In 1960, in 1975, in any year you choose to look, the workers who lost their retirement didn't lose it in a robbery. They lost it in a slow, bureaucratic, perfectly legal-looking process that took 30 years and left almost no one in prison. Which version of theft is actually more dangerous? Tell me what you think. And if there's a crime hiding inside an institution, a union, a bank, a government, that you think most Americans have never been told the full story of, at Tainted Century is Following the Money.